A beautiful stranger sat beside me and said, "Pretend you're my husband for 3 hours." I had planned for that Tuesday to be the most forgettable day of my life. Instead, it became the day that restored everything I thought I had lost. The woman who quietly slid into the booth beside me looked frightened but not broken. Her hands trembled as she leaned closer and whispered 7 words that instantly changed my world. "Pretend you're my husband for 3 hours." I stared at her in disbelief, wondering if I had just stepped into someone else's nightmare. Yet there was something in her eyes that didn't ask for adventure. It asked for mercy. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness, hope, forgiveness, compassion, and second chances still exist in this world, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach hearts that may need them the most. My name is Nathan, and I lived in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. At 38, I had settled into a quiet life repairing antique furniture after losing my wife Rachel to illness 4 years earlier. Since then, I had avoided anything that resembled emotional risk. My days followed the same routine, and I convinced myself that loneliness was simply the price of surviving grief. That afternoon, I had stopped at a small roadside diner after delivering a restored rocking chair to a customer. I was halfway through my coffee when the stranger appeared. Her name, I would soon learn, was Grace. She looked elegant but exhausted, as though she hadn't slept in days. She apologized for startling me, and explained in hurried whispers that several relatives would arrive at the diner within minutes. They believed she was happily married, and if they discovered the truth, an already painful family situation would become unbearable. Her elderly grandfather was celebrating his final birthday after being diagnosed with a serious illness. She had hidden the collapse of her marriage because she couldn't bear to burden him during his remaining time. Today the family had gathered unexpectedly and she had nowhere to turn. Everything about the request sounded unbelievable. Common sense told me to politely refuse, but grief teaches people to recognize desperation in another person's eyes. I remembered the strangers who had quietly helped me after Rachel passed away, expecting nothing in return. Sometimes compassion begins with believing someone when the world would rather walk away. I agreed. Within minutes, her relatives entered the diner laughing and carrying balloons. Grace gently slipped her hand into mine. My heart raced, not because I was pretending to be someone's husband, but because I realized how long it had been since another human being had trusted me enough to hold my hand. For the next 3 hours, I met grandparents, cousins, aunts, and uncles who welcomed me with warmth. Grace introduced me as her husband, Nathan. We shared stories, smiled for family photographs, and helped her grandfather, Walter, cut his birthday cake. The old man looked at us with peaceful eyes that carried decades of wisdom. He squeezed my shoulder and quietly said that the greatest blessing in life was having someone who stayed beside you when life became difficult. Those words pierced straight through my guarded heart. As the afternoon continued, I noticed something unexpected. Grace wasn't acting. Whenever she looked at her grandfather, tears gathered in her eyes before she forced another smile. She laughed so he wouldn't worry. She comforted everyone else while quietly carrying her own heartbreak. I realized she wasn't pretending for herself. She was protecting the people she loved. When the gathering finally ended, we walked outside into the soft evening light. She immediately apologized for placing such a burden on a complete stranger. She offered to repay me for my time, but I couldn't accept it. Kindness loses something precious when it comes with a price tag. Instead, she told me the truth. Her husband had abandoned the marriage months earlier after financial troubles destroyed their business. Ashamed and overwhelmed, she had hidden the separation from her aging grandfather because his health had declined so rapidly. She planned to tell the family eventually, but she wanted his final birthday to remain filled with hope instead of sadness. As she spoke, I shared my own story for the first time in years. I told her about Rachel, about the silence that filled my house every evening, and about how I had convinced myself that surviving was the same as living. Grace listened without interruption. Neither of us tried to fix the other's pain. Sometimes simply being heard is the beginning of healing. Over the following months, our paths continued to cross. What began as occasional coffee turned into long walks through city parks, volunteering together at a community food pantry, and helping elderly neighbors with home repairs. There was no dramatic romance, no fairy tale rush. There was simply trust growing where two broken lives had once stood alone. When Walter peacefully passed away the following spring, Grace invited me to the memorial service. Before it began, she handed me a folded letter. Her grandfather had written it weeks before his passing. Inside, he thanked the man he believed was his granddaughter's devoted husband for bringing joy back into her eyes. He wrote that whether our story was ordinary or extraordinary, love always begins with a single act of kindness. Grace smiled through her tears and admitted something that left me speechless. Before walking into that diner, she had prayed for help. She hadn't prayed for a husband. She hadn't prayed for romance. She had simply prayed that God would send one good person before she lost hope completely. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes that small acts of kindness can change a life. Your support truly means more than you know. And before we reach the end, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment and tell us this. Have you ever experienced unexpected kindness from a complete stranger that changed your life forever? 2 years later, on a warm autumn afternoon in the same little diner where we first met, I sat across from Grace once again. This time there was no pretending. I reached across the table, held her hands, and asked her to become my wife. Not for 3 hours, but for every ordinary day that life would give us. She smiled with tears shining in her eyes and quietly said yes. People often say miracles arrive with thunder and impossible signs. I don't believe that anymore. Sometimes a miracle walks through the front door of a small diner in America, sits beside a lonely stranger, and asks for help. What begins as an act of compassion can become the very thing that heals two wounded hearts. That day taught me something I will never forget. We rarely know why someone is carrying fear behind a smile, and we never know how one simple decision to show kindness may rewrite the ending of someone else's story, or our own.